So, what does all of the December activity mean for lawyers, Bridget? And we talked a little bit about why they might be making these releases or why not. And maybe we can just dive into why should we care as lawyers that these tech companies are releasing these things? They're not going to be immediately applicable to the work that most of us do. So, what's the upshot to you?
Yeah, so I actually I think they are immediately applicable to a lot of what we do. You're correct that I mean, you're that it's we still don't have a you know a frontier model tool that can basically produce a legal memo that you can just go file in a court. We don't have that. Although, as we know from Adam Unikowski's work, if you give it if you confine it to briefs, it can do a pretty great job writing an opinion or a decision. And if you give it a universe of cases and tell it to stay within those cases, it can do a pretty good job of writing a brief. So it's kind of close, to be honest. But putting that aside, because even if it does do a pretty good job, no lawyer should turn anything in to anyone or give it to a client without checking every piece of it. That's your job. But it's doing this contextual work that I do think is just as important. I mean, it's not lawyers don't only answer this specific question about what the law says you can do about X, Y, or Z. It's also like, why do we care if we can do X, Y, or Z? What's the context? And that's the thing that I think the deep research tool is incredibly good at. Like when I told you about my research with it over the weekend, it pulled from 59 different sources. It gives you all the sources, and some of those were really important secondary sources from state bars and other blogs and writers that I don't know how I would have found on my own. I just don't know how I would have found it. And so I think it would make me. I'm not a lawyer right now. I mean, I'm not practicing law right now. I think if I were practicing law, using these tools would make me a better lawyer right away because of that contextual support that there's no way I have time for. And I don't think I would burden an associate with. It's just like I really want to understand the context of my problem. Like, no, we're busy. We're just trying to do things. And I think it allows you to do that. So they are actually immediately useful. Um, and then of course I don't want to repeat again what we both said at the beginning, which is the pace at which these tools are scaling and being released with new features and new capabilities is really head spinning. And so any legal organization, um, lawyer, people who work with lawyers, who who still thinks you can maybe sit this one out, like maybe you were able to sit out some of the other technological disruptions that came for other industries. I feel like the jig is up, and I know I've said that before, but December told me, nobody will say that nobody in 2025 will say like, "Oh, no, we're not doing that. It's gonna pass." Although I did read a Detroit Free Press column this morning where the columnist, who I like very much, and she writes interesting stuff, said, "We should all stop using it. If you're using it, stop." That was literally the message. But I think you're right that there's still a lot to figure out about when it's gonna become fully functional on, like, the corpus of the law, right? And that's still, like, an outstanding question, and I don't know. What thoughts do you have about why it matters that I didn't get to, or, people should be focused on it?
Well, your comments make me sort of revisit the idea that we're not going to immediately use this because I think one of the things that I was thinking about in December um, is how lawyers who serve clients will need to develop new skill sets to collaborate with their clients because what you just said about the Detroit Free Press article made me think of what some of my colleagues who are legal writing professors were saying at the early days of like, ban it, like we're not going to use this. Like that ship has sailed. And I think the exciting part about this time is that we all have so much access to these tools and the ability to play with them and figure out how they can work for us. And what I think that means for lawyers is your clients are going to be playing with these tools and using them before they consult with you. I can't imagine a world a year from now where anybody who has a lawyer doesn't consult with an LLM before they reach out to the lawyer. And so I think lawyers need to be prepared to respond to that and to be comfortable sort of having this triad almost of the client, the LLM, and the lawyer, and figuring out how to work together and where you push back on the LLM and where the LLM is helpful. It makes me think of our other podcast about doctors, and doctors have sort of had version 1 of this with WebMD, and now they're gonna deal with a much more powerful version of that, but I don't think lawyers have had that era of clients coming to them with internet research as to what they think the law is, but I think that's about to change. What do you think?
Yeah, that's so no, I think that's so interesting, and the way different doctors have handled the WebMD problem is always so interesting just in my own life. Like, I had a wonderful pediatrician when my kids were little who knew I was coming in, like, armed with all kinds of WebMD. Like, I always tell I have one kid in medical school, and I'm always like, "Well, I am a WebMD, so if you have any questions you want answered, just let me know," because I'm a very accomplished WebMD. And my pediatrician was so patient about it and was always it would always, like, make me feel like I had smart questions, and maybe I did, I don't know, but, he was wonderful about it. I've I've had totally different experiences with other physicians, like, I had one, at in here in the U of M system who I went with with an article from a medical journal, like, I gotten it through, like, the U of M library, for a weird nerve, like, situation. And it was interesting because it was like a treatment that they were experimenting with in the EU, but not here yet. And so I at least wanted to, like, understand what he thought of it. And he was so dismissive and, like, annoyed that I showed up with these questions and the journal article that I literally, like, never went to him again. And meanwhile, I've had another doctor exactly the opposite reaction. She was like, "God, that's really interesting." Went and found, like, other information from other, like, EU journals and, figured out how to, like, do something about it. So it's interesting. I mean, I bet there will be lawyers on all sides of that equation as well, right? There will be some who will welcome the extra help, right? Um, Even if sometimes the extra help isn't quite right, they'll welcome the opportunity to explain why, and I think it'll give them an opportunity to show their client their value add, right? It's an opportunity, no matter how good or bad the extra advice is.
I think it's so true, and I just had this experience with my doctor, and she's a great doctor, I love my doctor, and she's, I would say, relatively young, she's in her 30s, and I've noticed a change even in the few years visiting her as we've all had more access to information, and I sort of think about what this means for lawyers, like, to your point, I think doctors historically have sort of controlled the narrative on everything that happens in their interface with you. And at the beginning, maybe because she was closer to training, she was very by the book. And the more I come in with, I heard this interview with X person, or I read this article, or all my friends are talking about this one thing, the more open she, yeah, and we had an explicit conversation because I was telling her about AI in law, and she said, "I know the medical profession really needs to accept that people just have access to lots and lots of information and help them sift through what they're accessing to find the good stuff and not just try to be, you know, person up on a mountain who makes the declaration as to what the truth is." And I thought that was so refreshing, but interesting for lawyers to the very point that you make, that that is our value add, is in helping people navigate all of the things that are unfolding around us.
I like lots of other things, if you see it as an opportunity, right? If you see it as an opportunity rather than a threat, it will be an opportunity and not a threat,
Right.
period.
Right. That's right. And we don't have time to get into all the applications, though I know that we will in episodes ahead. But we are, at the beginning of a new year in 2025. So maybe we could wrap up today with some of our predictions about what we envision for the year ahead in light of all these developments at the end of the year. So, Bridget, what are your predictions for 2025?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think, we're gonna see more agents. I don't know exactly what Sam Altman means by they're coming to work, but I do think that All of the frontier companies are going to have agents that people get comfortable with, whether in our personal lives or our professional lives, and probably both. So I think by the end of the year, we won't be imagining what AI agents are. We'll just be working with them. I again don't know exactly what it looks like, but I think that's likely to happen. Um, I think that we're gonna figure out how to. I don't know exactly what this is gonna look like either, but there's gonna be more integration with our generative AI tools and the rest of our lives, both our work lives and our personal lives again. I mean, I haven't fully eh, figured out how Apple Intelligence and ChatGPT are gonna make my iPhone better, but I know it will, or I'm told it does. But I have that's still on my to-do list this week to figure out all of that. And I'm in a Microsoft shop at work and a mixed shop at home, and so figuring out how to integrate it across all the other things that I do very regularly, I am very, very hopeful, and I predict will be better by the end of the year. But what are some of yours?
Agree with all of yours. And then I would just say, I think, we've talked about this before and we talked about it on this podcast a little bit, that the liberation of legal information to the general public, I think will start to grow in the sense that there will be, and already are, various projects to get legal information and the corpus of information into the hands of the public. And as those projects unfold and grow, they will be all over the internet. And as companies like Google get their bearings and try to figure out things like deep research, more and more people will be able to access all of the legal information that we have. And I know both you and I are excited about the possibilities for regular people to be able to get answers to their legal problems. And then I think to the earlier point of lawyers who serve private clients figuring out where their value add is and how they complement rather than act as the sole sort of provider of counsel and advice. Um, those are some of my predictions, and I hope that I'm really optimistic about that. Thank you for tuning in to 2030 Vision, AI and the Future of Law. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast and leave a review. Stay informed and inspired as we continue to explore the AI-driven future of the legal profession. We'll see you next time.